Am I on? Now you can hear. Hello and welcome everybody to this session this afternoon on the issue of emancipation or assimilation, LGBT rights globally. My name is Jane Martinson. I'm hoping that banging isn't some Russian hacker trying to make sure they know what we're going to be talking about the next half an hour. My name is Jane Martinson from The Guardian newspaper. But much more importantly, I want to introduce my panel today to talk about this issue. On my far right is Dustin Lance Black, who has an Academy Award-winning screenwriter and also founding member of the American Foundation for Equal Rights. I'm going to try not to move my head. I think that might be the key. Sarah Kate Ellis, who's the Executive Director, President and CEO of GLAAD, who's very cleverly decided to get a microphone instead of having this thing strapped to her head. Renato Sabadini, who's the Executive Director of ILGA, International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans and Intersex Association, newish title from the last year. And then on my immediate right is Richard Socrates, who is not only the Public Policy Director for GLG, also former White House advisor, and writes for The New Yorker, amongst others, on the issue that we're about to discuss today. Now, it's such an enormous topic, going from the fact that being openly gay is a criminal offence in more than 70 countries around the world, to the impact of the election of Donald Trump, a man who has made no secret that LGBTQ rights are not high on his agenda, that I felt we should start off asking each of this panel what they feel is the most important issue facing the LGBT community today. Richard, can we start with you?
Well, good. And just as this lovely person here next to me is fixing my mic, I think those sounds were coming from my microphone.
On my head.
But I think we're all fixed now. Anyway, thanks, Jane. Thanks for having us, and thanks to everybody here at the forum. I mean, listen, I think that despite the fact that in Western democracies, LGBT people, generally speaking, are seeing a better time of it. They're seeing more freedoms. They're seeing more dignity accorded to them. To me, the biggest threat is that globally, I think that you're seeing an increase in human rights abuses directed towards LGBT communities. And I think it's very clear to me that a big part of the reason is that a year ago we had a change in the administration in the U.S. and President Obama, when he was president, made it a huge priority to stake out a claim for LGBT equality globally. And while many of the countries who are engaging in this behavior now aren't necessarily those who care that much if they're admonished by the U.S., I think the fact that countries where discrimination is prevalent now see themselves as being able to get away with a lot of this, and so I think there's a big increase. I know the statistics are not necessarily in for this year yet, but I think anecdotally we hear that, we see that in the media, and I think it is far and away the gravest threat that LGBT people face now.
Sarah Kate, can I come to you next? Because you agree with some of these points about the new wave of violence, but do you agree that's the biggest threat?
I do. I think that the U.S. took a global leadership position under Obama. I don't think we were there first, but as large as our voice is, we were very much on the front lines of LGBTQ acceptance and equality globally. And now that it's been deprioritized by the Trump administration, and actually he's actually turning it on his own citizens and attacking his own LGBTQ citizens, I think that this gives rise and permission slip to the rest of the world when one of the global powers is not paying attention to it and has deprioritized it.
Okay.
But I think one of the things, if we're going on what we think is the big issues, and we're at the Web Summit, I just wanted to say that my big issue, I think, is where AI, artificial intelligence, meets the LGBTQ community. And one of the things that I'm seeing happening over and over again is that there was a major piece of research that was launched by Stanford University that actually GLAAD is a 32-year-old media advocacy organization, by the way, US-based, but we work globally. We worked really hard to put that piece of research under ethical review because it said that by a simple facial recognition, they can determine whether or not you're lesbian or gay specifically. And at frighteningly accurate levels is what the piece of research said. It is under ethical review. However, I will say when you talk about 72 countries still criminalizing being LGBTQ, 8 you can be put to death in. And then in the United States itself, there's over half the states in the United States you can still be fired from your job for being LGBTQ. And then you have artificial intelligence, where there are many great benefits of, but if they're going to start focusing on LGBTQ people, identifying them, firing them, criminalizing them, can get really dicey at times. So that's something that keeps me up at night and wondering, when is tech going to step up and realize that we need ethical guidelines around this great technology that is being created?
Thanks, Sarah Kate. Lance, as well as writing some amazing screenplays, you also go and talk to young people in colleges.
Sure.
What are the biggest issues that you find facing the community, and particularly for young people today?
Well, I mean, I would echo what Richard said, which is we're living in a time where we're not sure who our global leader is with any sort of strength to his or her leadership, the way that we had under Obama. Where he could use the United States and all of its economic sort of ability to sort of make sure people stayed in line to say, hey, you got to also be treating your LGBTQ citizens equally if we're going to do business with you. I get a lot of fear from young people that I haven't seen in about 8 years in the United States, not since Proposition 8 as I go around speaking. They're afraid for their lives, their ability to live openly, the ramifications of what they're seeing happen in Washington, D.C. I would say, though, that the issue I'd like to address that's perhaps secondary, and hopefully there's a solution in this, is I see in the LGBT community, particularly online, you see this happening, an examination and an investigation into all the ways we're incredibly different and diverse within our LGBT community and within communities of diversity. And I think that investigation is really beautiful. It's spectacular. Let's find out who we are and how very different we are. The problem there is if we let ourselves be divided by those differences instead of building bridges between them. And I do not see a lot of coalition building between communities of difference. Not enough.
Right.
And so in this beautiful examination of all of our differences, if we don't find the bridges, if we don't find the ways to collaborate, the coalition of the yeses that has been successful in the past, all we will do in our beautiful examination is help elect people like Donald Trump. Because divided, we will be conquered. So yes, I would say to young people out there, investigate your difference, lift it up, but don't race to the bottom. Don't say, hey, I'm the one being discriminated against the most, so I'm going to stay in my little corner over here and go away. You got to reach out to people who are very, very different than you, and not just in the LGBT community, but in other communities who are seeking to be treated equally under the law with their difference, and build a coalition. And if you need help figuring out how to do that, look to history. Because our great successes in civil rights movements have come in those moments of coalition building.
Great, thank you. Renato, you're the only non-American on this panel, apart from me, obviously. What do
You count.
I count. What do you see as the biggest issue looking across the globe?
There are several. ILGA has just completed, for the second year in a row, a world attitude survey, together with a Canadian data company called Rewe Corporation. And we were able to get the feedback from 116,000 people in 77 countries around the world. And the results are published on our website. And in this, from this survey emerges that, which was published with The Guardian last week, the title chosen by The Guardian was "One Quarter of the World Believes That Homosexuality Should Be Criminalized." True, but half of the world is against that, and another quarter is still undecided. So what I'm saying is that there is a reason, of course, for worrying about violence and discrimination against the people on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics. But at the same time, the world is changing, and even from countries where, like Saudi Arabia or Iran, when people are allowed to answer a survey anonymously with the guarantee of being anonymous, you would be surprised by the kind of responses that you get, meaning more liberal than you would generally expect. We also found that one big factor influencing attitudes in people globally is whether or not they know someone who is either gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, or intersex. Personal knowledge influences the responses of the people to this kind of question. If they know someone who is LGBTI, they are more likely to reply favorably when asked if everybody should be granted equal rights regardless of sexual orientation and gender identity.
That's such a great argument for coming out.
It is a great argument for coming out indeed, and also because visibility, although dangerous in many places, we should not forget that visibility in many places is still dangerous business. Nevertheless, it is by being visible, at least within the family circle, that a real conversation for changing attitudes in a more progressive sense can happen. The other thing that we observe is that we publish every year the so-called state-sponsored homophobia report, which is a legal survey of legislation affecting people on the basis of their sexual orientation around the world. If we look at, we still have the famous 72 countries which criminalize, and that's of course something that needs to keep us worried, and we need to, we don't have to lower our guard, we need to keep engaged. At the same time, 10 years ago, the same states were 92. So what I'm saying, 92.
No, how many years ago? That was over the past 20 years.
In the last 10 years,
10.
20 countries that criminalized are no longer criminalizing. Okay?
Yeah.
So if we look at things on the long term, the trend remains positive. In relation to violence,
Don't you think? Can I ask you that? But don't you think that part of that is that we had so far to come? I mean, obviously, the very fact that there are places where people are allowed to express non-conforming gender identities. I mean, 50 years ago, there wasn't probably anywhere on the globe where you could express a gender non-conforming sexual orientation. So, I mean, yes, of course, there's progress, but there's so much more to do. I think, if I can just take off on something Lance said, I mean, in terms of building coalitions, if you want to talk about building coalitions, I would highly recommend that everybody watch Lance's 8-hour masterpiece, When We Rise, that was released earlier this year on ABC in the U.S., sure, but is now available almost everywhere around the globe, to really talk about how to build coalitions and how coalitions were built all through the history of this movement. I would also highly recommend Sarah Kate's organization, GLAD, which is all about building coalitions with media organizations and with getting the truth out, and how the truth is at the center of building those coalitions. So great work to both of you.
And can I ask, one of the things that we've talked about is the impact on Trump. And I don't want him to overtake this entire debate, because that would be too depressing.
He overtakes everything, so he might as well overtake this.
No. But one of the things you've talked about, Richard, is building a coalition around the world that could perhaps negate somebody in the White House for the first time in more than 8 years who is not keen on the LGBT rights agenda. What sort of coalition can you foresee politically?
Well, you know, I mean, I don't want to make this sound like everything is about the U.S. because, of course, everything is not about the U.S. But up until a year ago, the U.S. was a very powerful force for LGBT rights globally, and now I think we have to look at coalitions from other Western democracies, and we have to look at organizations like GLAAD and the other organizations that Sarah Kate works for, to make it so that countries, no matter what countries they are, that countries feel that they're going to be called upon it. Countries feel that there is a price to pay. I think journalism has to play a very important role. The Guardian is already stepped up to the plate and is playing a very important role in making sure that countries don't feel like they can get away with this, because it's shining a light on this behavior. Even if you don't really think that countries care, people, you know, even in some of these faraway places, they care, and if they know they're going to get in trouble for it, they are less likely to do it.
But ultimately, I do think, and this, you can see a little bit of this in the struggle for equality within the United States. When people came in from California to Florida to try and impose equality on Florida in the 70s, it didn't work. It created a backlash. I think part of what we have to do is empower leaders in these countries that are still subject to some horrific sort of criminalization laws. We have to support them, shine light on their cause, let them know that we will be there for them so that they can take leadership roles in their own country, so they can make it safer to come out and share their stories in their country. We're going to ask them to be very, very brave, and as an LGBT community, we cannot neglect them and forget them. I can't tell you how many times I go online and I see brave leaders around the country coming out and begging for a retweet. If you're online, follow leaders from these countries where really the price of coming out is life or death, and please try and shine light on their struggle. I would say journalists need to do that. We also need to do that. We have a responsibility as LGBT citizens of more free countries to also help shine that light, because change, I believe, will come from within.
I completely agree with that. And one thing that we've done very successfully at GLAAD is taken what we've done successfully in the United States and taught other leaders what we do, and then they make it culturally relevant. So we have this big event, but they're awards, they're media awards. So for fair and accurate representation of LGBTQ people, we give out awards for that. We do it in LA and New York, and it focuses on Hollywood and news and journalism in New York. And we've taken that and created ways for other countries. We did them in Italy about a year ago. They're the diversity awards. We didn't do them. We assisted the leadership there. And how to measure media, and then how to reward good players in it. And we give them our fundraising model. So we teach them how to use those galas as fundraisers so they can fund their own work and they become sustainable on their own. And I think that's really important too, is helping these people get assets so that they can continue to do the work on the ground. Because you're right, you cannot go in to any other country, any other state in the United States and tell people what to do. You can just inform them with your best practices and let them use that as a canvas to build what's relevant to theirs.
We're here at the Web Summit, and it seems to me so much of what you mentioned already in terms of visibility, in terms of global assimilation, is a sort of positive. Young people being able to come out, global leaders asking for retweets. But there are also some negatives that would be good to discuss.
Well,
in terms of the positive, if I may say, as the only non-American on the stage.
But which surprisingly more positive, maybe not so surprisingly.
Exactly. But concerning, for instance, the number of episodes of violence and attacks against LGBTI people around the world, but also particularly the hateful waves that we recently saw in Chechnya, Azerbaijan, Egypt, and many other countries. It needs to be said that without the technology, the people on the ground would have not been able to talk about this and to report about these episodes. These tragedies would have been unheard.
Yeah.
The fact that there are today so many LGBTI activists, usually very well versed in with the modern technology, is one of the key for success in our field.
I will say another element of that. I mean, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
But I would say that for LGBT people everywhere around the globe, that technology and the internet itself has been the number one source of more and more freedom, because the ability to discover that there are people like you in faraway places. I mean, isolation is our greatest is the greatest fear and the greatest challenge to LGBT equality. And for a long time, without the internet, many people felt isolated. But of course, with the internet, people knew that there were LGBT people all over the world that were like you. And I think the ability to connect with people from faraway places that were like you was totally freeing, and many more people came out. So in many ways, the internet itself and even the internet very early on was incredibly freeing as soon as people could realize that there were other people like them. But it also, we're seeing now more recently the challenges that also come with that, and the ability to generate fake news, the ability to use the internet as a way to scare people, and it's both it's both the thing that makes us most free, but it also has a capability to scare people, and by doing that, getting them to vote in certain ways and getting them to turn against human rights.
Well, can I just add to that? I believe that the root of homophobia is misinformation, right? Homophobia is about those myths and those lies and those stereotypes that have been built over generations, reinforced. It's why when people know someone who's LGBT, the homophobia tends to go away. You realize those lies and myths aren't quite true. Well, now, the internet has a responsibility, I believe, and we're not holding it to it yet.
Yeah.
Right now, I believe we're in a place, and we saw it in the United States around the last election, where a lot of misinformation is being disseminated on the internet, through Twitter, through Facebook, about LGBT people. It's very clever of whoever's putting it out there, whether it be Russia, whether it be some sort of conservative group in the United States, telling lies and myths about LGBT people again. And it's effective, right?
Yeah.
It makes places feel less safe to be out. And if you feel less safe to be out, you're not going to dispel myths and lies and stereotypes, and it becomes self-feeding. And I think that if we hold the press to account, and we say to the press, if you lie in a manner that causes harm to the population, there will be consequences. Well, it's about damn time we hold Twitter and Facebook responsible for telling the truth, especially when it causes harm to individuals and to groups like the LGBTQ community. And I think we are at that place right now.
Yeah.
It's time to figure out how we hold the internet to account for truth.
Yeah. Sarah Kate, you mentioned that
agree.
earlier.
I think that's something that we have been pushing for at GLAAD right now. And what we're also seeing is that within that is that the artificial intelligence that's being created by the engineers themselves have built-in biases, right? And because the engineers themselves tend to be white, tend to be male, tend to be cisgender and straight, we're seeing things like on YouTube, restricted mode is brought down in one day 120 million LGBT pieces of video, right? And so, but the really prominent LGBTQ creators on YouTube were back up and running within 48 hours. The younger ones still aren't back up and running in months. And so the next generation of creators and content creators and LGBTQ people have been censored by this artificial intelligence. The machine has taken over keywords and used it then against the community. And so I think, and we're seeing it on Twitter. If you put in a search right now for bisexual on Twitter, you will not find it. It's been blocked. And we've been bringing this up. And this is hard stuff. And this is at the root of the problem. And if we don't start talking about it and fixing it as we continue to automate, there's going to be much bigger problems down the line.
Let's just remember, though, to what Lance said about holding Twitter and Facebook accountable, that we're all here in Lisbon, 60,000 strong, most people in technology. I mean, this is a hugely important opportunity for the 60,000 people who are here, for the 60,000 tech executives and tech entrepreneurs and tech engineers and people who are at the center of this technology community to really do what Lance said, and that is hold the big tech companies accountable for the lies they are putting out about LGBT people, but also people more broadly, and hold and create some kind of standard for truth-telling that we see in journalism, that we try to see in politics. Let's also have it in technology. Let's use these technologies that are such a tremendous force for good. Let's extend them and make sure that they're also truthful and not a force for evil.
Right.
And at the same time, I think it's important as more and more of our fellow activists, for instance, in China and many other countries are realizing it is important for us to become more savvy when it comes to sending emails, when it comes to making a video call, etc. We need to learn and to teach when we know already how to encrypt our messages, how to protect our software and hardware from the interference of malicious government or third malicious parties. And there are so many tech companies here in Lisbon. I would hope that many of them reach also out, because whatever they can offer, especially for the LGBTI movement in the global south, but also in the global east and north, would be extremely welcome and could help a lot of activists to carry on their work in a safer way.
Thanks. How significant is, there's much that's been talked about the rise of extremism and using the web globally, whether it's American evangelists funding Eastern European or assault in Africa. How much can Facebook, Twitter, social media groups do, and why aren't they doing it? Who has the answer to that?
Well, the suggestion we do currently to many of our activists in the global south and east, but also north, do not rely only on Facebook and Twitter. Use that for the funny thing, but if you have to communicate serious stuff, if you do have to reach out people to organize and mobilize them, you rather use WhatsApp, that at least is encrypted, or other channels.
But you're asking what can they do practically? I mean, I think they can start by exercising some common sense. I mean, if you are Facebook and you see that that there is a fake account paying for an anti-gay ad in a U.S. political election and paying for it in rubles, you can ask a couple of basic questions and not just turn a blind eye to it. You can say, like, maybe there's something suspicious here. You have a duty, the internet has a duty of care to the people who are on it. These companies have a duty of care to the people who are subscribers and who are relying on them. You know, there's a duty of care to the ultimate users and the ultimate consumers, that there at least be some basic mechanisms put in place. Now, I know they're trying, and I know they say they were caught off guard like everybody else, and maybe that's true. But, you know, we can be fooled one time, but you know, one chance is all you get to steal an election like the election that was stolen from the American people in the U.S. If not, you know, it wasn't only because of fake news over the internet, but it certainly played a very significant part.
I also think that what we have to realize is that so much of the wedge issues that were used, they weren't even political ads. They were actually just targeting the LGBT community or the Black Lives Matter movement. And so they use these specific social issues, people's lives, to divide and conquer, and would actually ask people to show up for activist moments and to come to rallies. And so it doesn't even fall within the ad, you know, because there are political ads, you need to know where they're being funded from. They took one step further and just did social activism and turned it on itself. So we have to go beyond ads, because the ads have to be monitored a certain way, especially in a political race, at least in the United States. But then they took social activism and used it against us.
Yeah, there are those individuals, and I will call bullshit a little bit on the internet world and on these major companies. If they could take the time to ban my husband's recent video where he and I put on Halloween makeup to certain audiences, which they did, and by the way, I guess only because we're husbands of the same gender, why can't they figure out who these faceless people are who are advocating for fear of people who are different for political gain? If you can target Tom and I for putting on Halloween makeup, and you can create that algorithm, you better get to work creating an algorithm to figure out who is utilizing fear to divide us for political gain. They can do it. They're just not.
Except what were your costumes?
A Ninja Turtle, and I was a Lego.
We need
Well,
to
that
see
sounds
that.
very subversive.
Next time we'll
I can
have it on the
understand
video.
why they went after you for that. That sounds very
Yeah,
subversive.
it was very racy.
Thank you. I would like, I think, I'm not entirely sure what's going on with the number, but I think one last question I'd like you all to answer, like a one-word answer, if possible. Given where we've been, that sometimes it feels as if, as Renato said, you know, just 10 years ago, 20, 50 in the States, the past is another country. It was worse in so many ways. Sitting where we are now, talking about technology, the huge impact of technology, good and bad, about the global rights, about the American system. Looking forward 20 years, do you think it'll be better or worse for the LGBT community? I want you all each to go in turn, better or worse. Lance, start with you.
It depends on us. I do not think it's a foregone conclusion that this is the last gasp of hate. That is up to us. And it's how we react to this moment. You know, there's too many people saying, oh, this is just the last dying gasp of this anti-gay thing. I'm sure people were saying that in the 1930s and 40s. It's up to us to do the hard work, to build the coalitions, to erase the misinformation, to make sure that this generation has it even better, and so do their children. It's hard work, but we got to do it.
Sarah Kate.
I'm in agreement. I think it's vigilance, and I don't think that we can just look at the past as it progressively got better and say that's the trajectory forward. It absolutely is not the trajectory forward. It is up to us, and we need to decide, are we going to stand up and fight? And I think that we're seeing a lot of people in America do it, and I hope that we see globally the same.
Renato, better or worse?
I believe better, and so will be the rest of humanity, barring climate change, war, or the singularity. Let's not forget that.
Okay,
I am a short-term pessimist, but a long-term optimist.
great. On that note, I would like you all to thank this fabulous panel. Richard
Thank you,
Rodriguez,
Jane.
Renato,
Thank you, Jane.
Sarah
Thank you,
Kate
Jane.
Ellis, and
Fantastic
Dustin
moderator.
Black. Thank you.